a little boy saw a homeless woman and cried out, "Daddy, she looks just like Mommy." What followed shattered a millionaire's world and uncovered a secret hidden for 34 years. A secret of love, of betrayal, and of a sister left behind to vanish in the streets. This is the story of how truth refuses to stay buried. It was a crisp afternoon in downtown Chicago. The streets bustled with noise, horns honking, heels tapping, and conversations blending into a low city hum. But for 8-year-old Charlie, nothing else existed. He tugged hard at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, Daddy, look. That lady over there. She looks just like Mommy." His father, Daniel Whitaker, CEO of one of Chicago's biggest tech firms, was just stepping out of a 5-star restaurant. In one hand, he held a sleek phone. In the other, his son's small fingers. But at that moment, Daniel froze. The woman Charlie was pointing to was sitting against a brick wall, wearing torn clothes, her head bowed over a plastic bag of what looked like scraps. And she had Sarah's face. Sarah, Daniel's wife. Sarah, who had died of cancer 3 years ago. He stumbled backward, suddenly breathless. His knees trembled. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs like it wanted out. It wasn't a resemblance. It wasn't a coincidence. It was her. The same eyes, the same cheekbones, even the same slight tilt of her head when she looked up and caught someone's gaze. But this woman was no memory in a photo frame. She was real, alive, and sitting on the cold concrete asking strangers for change. Daniel blinked. He stared. He couldn't look away. "Sir, are you okay?" A security guard had noticed him standing stiff in the middle of the sidewalk. Daniel didn't respond. He was still gripping Charlie's hand too tightly, unaware that tears had started to slide down his cheeks. The woman hadn't seen them yet. She was digging through her bag, slowly, carefully, like every item inside held value. There was a calm to her face, but also a weight, like life had been anything but kind. Her name was Kira. She was 34. She had no idea someone was staring at her as if they'd just seen a ghost. Kira had lived on the street since she was 15, ran away from a foster home where fists flew more often than words. 20 years she'd survived as invisible. No ID, no home. No one who remembered her birthday. But today, someone saw her, and he looked wrecked. Daniel took a hesitant step forward. Another. Kira looked up. For 1 second, their eyes locked. Something flickered in her. Recognition, fear. She wasn't sure. But Daniel, he saw it clearly. In that one glance, Sarah had come back to life. He moved closer, barely able to find his voice. "Excuse me, can I ask you your name?" Kira tensed. She pulled her bag tighter. "Kira," she said, her voice low, guarded. He blinked again. "Kira. Kira what?" Now she looked truly alarmed. "Why do you want to know?" Daniel reached into his coat pocket, hands trembling. He pulled out his phone and opened a photo. He held it out to her. "Do you know this woman?" Kira looked, and everything inside her turned cold. The woman in the picture had styled hair, pearls on her ears, and a smile that looked so out of reach. But the face? It was hers. Who is that?" she whispered. Daniel swallowed. "She was my wife." Silence. She looked down, then back up. "Was?" "She died 3 years ago." Kira didn't move, didn't speak. Her hands gripped her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Daniel crouched down, leveling with her. "You look exactly like her." Charlie had stayed quiet, unsure what all this meant, but now he tugged his father's sleeve again. "Daddy, why are you crying?" Daniel didn't even notice the tears this time. His whole world was spinning. This couldn't be real. His wife had no siblings. Her parents had said so at the funeral. No twin, no sister, no one. But the evidence sat inches away on the sidewalk, in worn shoes and a sweatshirt too thin for the weather. And her name was Kira. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He didn't go back to his office. He didn't return calls. He sat in his home, surrounded by photos of Sarah, wondering how a woman with her exact face could be out there, alive, and homeless. And he knew one thing. He had to find out the truth, even if it meant reopening wounds that never truly healed, even if it meant everything he thought he knew about Sarah was a lie. Daniel didn't wait long. The very next morning, as the sun cast pale light through his office windows, he made a single call to the best private investigator in the city. "Find everything you can," he said quietly. "Her name's Kira Williams, about 34. No fixed address. I need to know who she is, where she came from, and why she looks exactly like my wife." James Nolan, a man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen more secrets than most people could imagine, didn't ask many questions. He simply said, "Give me 2 days." Meanwhile, across town, Kira sat on the edge of a shelter cot. She couldn't sleep. Not after yesterday. Not after that man knelt in front of her like she meant something. Not after he showed her that photo. That woman. That face. That life. It haunted her. Kira had never seen herself like that before. Dressed up, smiling in sunlight, loved. And the little boy. He had called her Mommy. Something inside her had cracked open. Something she had long buried. She pulled out a worn notebook from her bag. Inside were a few names. Old memories. One of them was a name she'd written years ago, when a social worker mentioned she might have had a sister. But no one ever followed up. No one ever looked. Back at Daniel's office, James returned faster than expected. He placed a thin file on the desk and said, "Brace yourself." Daniel flipped it open. The first page made his stomach tighten. No birth certificate. No legal family records. Kira had been in 12 different foster homes before the age of 15. Her file was filled with notes: abuse, runaway, uncooperative. She had vanished from the system at 16. "She's a ghost, Daniel," James said quietly. "On paper, she barely exists." Daniel frowned. "That's impossible. Someone always has records. Always." James looked at him. "Unless someone made sure she wouldn't." Daniel gripped the photo of Sarah on his desk. His late wife had always told him she was an only child. Her parents, Margaret and Helen Blackwood, had said the same. But now, doubt crept in like a shadow. He whispered, "She lied to me?" "No," James said softly. "Maybe they lied to her." Across town, Margaret Blackwood answered a call that chilled her to her bones. "Helen," she said, her voice sharp. "It's early. What is it?" "Maggie." Her sister's voice trembled. "I saw him. Michael, Daniel. He was talking to her." Margaret went still. "To who?" "That woman. The one from the streets. She looks exactly like Sarah." Silence fell. Helen lowered her voice. "What if he finds out? What we did? What happened 34 years ago?" "You said it was taken care of," Margaret snapped. "I thought it was," Helen whispered. "You said you burned the certificate." Margaret stood up, walking toward the safe in her closet. "I kept it, just in case. It's been there for years." Helen gasped. "Are you crazy?" Margaret's hands shook as she opened the metal door. The folder was still there. Yellowed paper. Hidden truth. "I'll destroy it," she said coldly. "Tonight." But across town, Daniel wasn't waiting for secrets to be destroyed. He had already made his move. He offered Kira $1,000 just to take a DNA test. At first, she hesitated. "Why do you want this?" she asked, her voice still wary. "What if I don't want to know?" Daniel didn't try to convince her with words. He simply looked her in the eyes and said, "Because I need to know. And maybe you do too." Next to him, little Charlie added softly, "If you're family to Mommy, then you're family to us too." Kira had never heard anything like that before, not in 20 years. She nodded. And just like that, two lives, one of wealth, one of pain, began to walk a shared path. But what neither of them knew was that somewhere behind locked doors, two women were quietly trying to erase a past that refused to stay buried, and one of them would stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden forever. Kira sat in the clinic chair, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to tremble. The nurse had already swabbed the inside of her cheek. Daniel sat across from her, watching closely, his face calm, but his fingers wouldn't stop tapping the side of his phone. It had only taken 5 minutes. But to Kira, it felt like a lifetime. When the nurse left, silence filled the small white room. "I don't know what the test will say," Kira murmured, "but thank you. No one ever tried to find out where I came from before." Daniel leaned forward. "You deserve to know. Everyone does." He looked at her, really looked. This woman who had slept in alleyways, who still flinched every time a door opened too fast, had his wife's exact face. Her eyes, her voice, even the way she smiled when she didn't want to. He couldn't explain it. But deep down, he already knew. Back at the Blackwood home, Margaret poured herself a glass of wine. She was trying to stay composed, pretend everything was under control. But her hands trembled. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Richard," she said sweetly, "I need to speak with you. It's about Daniel and our grandson." Richard Harrison, chairman of the board and co-founder of Daniel's company, was an old friend of the family. Conservative, calculating, always wary of anything that could make headlines. Margaret spoke carefully. "Daniel's getting involved with someone unstable, a woman from the streets. She looks like Sarah, and now he's bringing her around Charlie. I'm worried, deeply worried. You know how much Sarah meant to all of us." Richard's voice dropped. "Do you think this could affect the company?" "I think it already is," Margaret replied. "She could be manipulating him. For money, for access. I don't know." What Margaret didn't know was that Daniel had recently installed a voice recorder in his office. Every call, every conversation, automatically saved. And that one? It was already sitting in James Nolan's inbox. The next morning, James showed up at Daniel's office, his expression grim. "I got into the old social services files," he said. "It took some digging, but I found something." He laid a set of papers on the table, yellowed, stamped, official. 34 years ago, 2 black baby girls were admitted to a private orphanage. Twin sisters. One was put up for adoption. The other disappeared into the foster system. Daniel stared. "No names on the adoption?" James shook his head. "Not at first, but I traced some internal notes. Sarah Blackwood was informally adopted. No legal proceedings, no court papers, just a cash donation. $15,000. Daniel felt his stomach turn. "You're saying they bought her?" James looked down. "I'm saying your wife had a sister, and her family chose which child to keep." Daniel stood up, pacing the room. His voice cracked. "Sarah never knew. She couldn't have." "Maybe not," James said, "but Margaret and Helen, they knew everything." That night, The DNA results arrived. Daniel stared at the envelope, held it in both hands. His palms were sweating. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning the words. Then he sat down, hard. He whispered, 99.7%. Kira and Sarah were twins. Identical. His whole body went numb. He looked over at the photo on his desk. Sarah on their wedding day, smiling, her hand in his. Her mother right beside her. The woman who had kept this secret, who had let another child vanish into the system. He picked up the phone. "James," he said, "I want everything, every payment, every forged signature, every file. And I want cameras in Margaret's house. If she's still hiding something, we'll find it." James hesitated. "That's a line, Daniel." "No," Daniel said coldly. "They crossed the line 34 years ago." That same night, Kira lay in a real bed. In a guest room Daniel had prepared. Clean sheets, a warm meal in her belly. She stared at the ceiling, still too stunned to sleep. In her heart, she knew something big was coming. But she didn't know that across the city, 2 women were scrambling, trying to erase every trace of what they'd done, trying to bury the past, before the world could see what they had chosen to forget. Margaret Blackwood stood in her living room, sunlight pouring through the large windows, casting long shadows on the polished floor. She had spent her life building this world, elegance, respect, status. Now it was slipping. Her hands shook as she held the envelope. The birth certificate Helen had stupidly kept all these years. It was old, yellowed, but clear. 2 names, Sarah Williams, Kira Williams, twins. Helen sat across from her, pale and jittery. "You said you'd destroy it, Margaret. You promised." "I will," Margaret muttered. "But I need to think. If anyone finds this—" "They already found her," Helen hissed. "What are you thinking? That this will all just go away?" Margaret snapped. "We gave Sarah everything. She had a good life. We couldn't afford both. We did what we had to do." But as she spoke the words aloud, even she didn't fully believe them anymore. And just then, the doorbell rang. Margaret composed herself, straightened her blouse, poured wine. When she opened the door, Daniel was standing there, calm, serious, behind him, Charlie and Kira. Margaret blinked hard. For a moment, it was like seeing a ghost. That face. Helen stepped into the room and froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Daniel," Margaret began sweetly, "I'm so glad you've come to your senses." Daniel gave a tight smile. "I have." She poured him a glass of wine, her tone light. "That woman, she was clearly disturbed. I'm relieved you're protecting Charlie from—" "I brought something to show you," Daniel interrupted. He placed a tablet on the coffee table, pressed play. Margaret's own voice filled the room. "What if he finds out what we did 34 years ago?" The wine glass slipped from her hand, shattered. Helen gasped. "How did you—" Daniel didn't flinch. "Office recordings. 4 conversations. I have them all." Margaret looked like she couldn't breathe. "There's more," Daniel said. He tapped the screen again. Helen's voice played next. "I kept a copy of the original certificate. It's been in my safe for 34 years. Helen jumped up, knocking over her chair. "Margaret, you said he'd never find out." "You kept everything," Daniel said coldly. "James found the payment records, the forged papers, even the renewals of the silence agreement." He dropped a folder onto the table. Pages spilled out. 15,000 to the orphanage director, 5 more to falsify documents, 3 separate payments over the years to keep Kira hidden. Then he pulled out the final paper, the birth certificate. Sarah Williams, Kira Williams, born the same day, same mother, same hospital. Margaret lunged for the papers, but Daniel pulled them back. Number not this time. You've hidden the truth for 34 years. Now you'll speak it in front of her. Kira stepped forward. Her voice was low, steady. While Sarah grew up in mansions, went to private schools, had everything, I was sleeping in alleys, eating from garbage cans, getting beaten for nothing. Helen began crying, loud, messy sobs. I told her to stop, Kira. I told her it was too cruel. "Shut up, Helen," Margaret snapped. Her composure cracked, and years of bitterness poured out. "You think I had a choice? We couldn't afford 2 babies. We had nothing. I gave one of you a chance at a real life." Kira shook her head slowly. "You gave me nothing. You took everything, and you did it with a smile." Just then, Daniel's phone buzzed. He put it on speaker. "Daniel, this is Richard Harrison," the voice said. "We just saw the broadcast. The company is issuing a statement. Margaret Blackwood is permanently banned from any role or influence in our operations. You have our full support." Margaret stood frozen. In minutes, she had lost her reputation. Her grip on Daniel, her access to Charlie, even her connection to the company Sarah helped build. Reporters began arriving outside. Cameras, microphones, civil rights lawyers. Kira turned toward the media. And finally, she spoke for herself. "I don't want money. I don't want revenge. I want the truth. The world deserves to know what they did to me, and what they tried to hide." Margaret collapsed into a chair, staring at the ruins of her legacy. "You've destroyed me," she whispered. "No," Kira said, her voice calm. "You destroyed yourself." And for the first time in 34 years, she felt seen, heard, and powerful. 6 months had passed. The chill of winter had softened into spring, but for Kira, it felt like the first warm season of her life. Not because of the weather, but because, for once, she wasn't surviving. She was living. She stood in the kitchen of a modest but beautiful home on the edge of the city. Her home. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Toast popped from the toaster. And Charlie, bright-eyed, full of energy, bounded into the room in his school uniform. "Aunt Kira, are you still coming to my presentation today?" he asked, grinning. She turned from the counter, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart." Charlie beamed. Daniel entered moments later, his tie slightly crooked, holding 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to Kira. "Still no sleep?" he asked gently. Kira shrugged with a half-smile. "I slept, just dreaming bigger than I'm used to." Daniel chuckled. "You better get used to it. You're making waves." He wasn't wrong. In the 6 months since the truth had gone public, Kira's story had traveled across the globe, not just because of the shocking scandal, but because of what she did with it. The Sarah and Kira Williams Foundation had already taken 847 people off the streets. 23 families had been reunited through her work. And a new bill, Kira's Law, was gaining momentum in Congress, aimed at ensuring adoption records would never again be erased or hidden. CNN had booked her for a live interview. Harvard and Oxford had extended invitations to speak. And Forbes. They named her one of the 40 under 40 most influential figures of the year. But none of it compared to this moment, standing in the kitchen helping Charlie adjust his collar. None of it compared to being chosen, because for 34 years she wasn't. Until now. Across town, Margaret Blackwood sat in a prison courtroom, her 3rd appearance since the scandal. She was no longer the regal matriarch of a prestigious family. Her hair was gray and thinning, her eyes sunken, her hands trembling. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. In addition to your prior conviction, you have been found guilty of tax evasion, document forgery, and child trafficking. You are hereby sentenced to 15 additional years without the possibility of parole. Margaret said nothing. She just stared at her hands. Helen, once her closest ally, had moved to another state, changed her name, and denied ever knowing her. The friends who once praised Margaret had all vanished. The church had disowned her. Her estate had been sold, her reputation obliterated. In the front row, Kira sat beside Daniel, quiet, dignified, unmoved. "There's no joy in revenge," she whispered to him. "Only peace in justice." Daniel nodded. That night, the three of them, Kira, Daniel, and Charlie, had dinner together. They laughed over Charlie's class presentation. Families lost and found. Kira helped with his math homework, leaning over the table with quiet patience. Daniel watched it all, still in awe of how what once felt like the greatest tragedy of his life had become the greatest gift. Halfway through dinner, Charlie paused and looked at Kira. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Can I call Aunt Kira my second mom?" The room went still. Kira froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears before she could speak. Daniel smiled gently. "If it's okay with her, then it's okay with me." Kira reached for Charlie's hand and squeezed it. "You can call me anything you want," she whispered. "Just don't stop calling me yours." A year later, she stood on stage at a nationally televised ceremony in Washington, D.C. She had just been named Chicago's Heroine of the Year. As the applause died down, Kira stepped forward and began to speak. Margaret Blackwood thought she could choose which child deserved love and which one didn't. She thought money gave her the right to decide who mattered. But what she didn't understand is that true love can't be bought, and dignity can't be erased by silence. The audience rose. Applause thundered. Millions watched online as Kira's speech went viral. And somewhere behind bars, Margaret saw it all from a tiny prison television. For the first time, she didn't feel powerful. She felt small, because the girl she had tried to erase had become a light for the whole world to see. Kira's law would soon pass in 47 states. Her foundation would help over 15,000 people within the next 5 years. And in classrooms across the country, her story would be studied as a lesson in truth, resilience, and human worth. In her final recorded interview, Kira said, "They tried to make me invisible, but I chose to shine. Not just for myself, but for everyone still living in the shadows, waiting to be seen." And that is how one broken girl became the voice of thousands, not by being chosen, but by rising anyway.